Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Think and Speak English. I'm Julia, and I'm really happy you're here with us today.
And I'm Adam. This is episode 8. And I have to say, this one feels a little special to me, because today's topic is something that I think about quite a lot. And I mean that quite literally.
Ha! Yes! Today we are talking about thinking out loud in English. What it means, how it sounds, and how you can do it naturally without freezing up, without over-planning, without feeling like you need to have the perfect sentence ready before you open your mouth.
Because that's such a common experience for language learners, isn't it? You have a thought, it's there, somewhere inside you, but getting it out into words, in English, in real time, in front of another person, that feels like a huge leap.
And so what often happens is you just wait. You stay quiet, you listen, and the moment passes.
And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes listening is exactly the right thing to do. But other times you had something real to contribute. And it didn't come out. And that's a frustrating feeling.
So today we want to help with that. Not by teaching you a list of phrases and saying, memorize these, but by showing you what thinking out loud actually sounds like, how messy it is, how natural that messiness is, and how you can embrace it rather than fight it.
Because here's something I want to say right at the start. Thinking out loud in English is not supposed to sound perfect. It's supposed to sound like a person thinking, which means pauses, which means starting a sentence and going in a slightly different direction, which means saying him, or I'm not sure, or actually wait.
And those things are not mistakes. Those are signs that you're genuinely engaged, that you're actually working through an idea in real time.
Which is exactly what we want.
Okay, so let's just start by talking. Adam, I have a question for you. When you have a complex thought, do you find it easier to think through it alone first and then say it, or do you tend to think by talking?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Let me think about that for a second. I think I'm actually somewhere in between. Like if it's something I know well, I tend to just start talking and see where it goes. But if it's something I'm genuinely uncertain about, I sometimes need a moment first, just to get a handle on it.
That's interesting. And do you ever find that the act of saying something out loud changes what you think?
Yes, all the time actually. Sometimes I start saying something and partway through I realize, oh, that's not quite what I mean. And then I have to kind of correct course mid-sentence.
Right? And that's such a normal experience. But in a second language, that moment of correcting course can feel really exposing because you're not just rethinking your idea, you're also trying to find the language for the new version of the idea in real time, under pressure.
Which is a lot to manage at once.
It really is. So I think one of the most freeing things we can do today is just normalize that experience. Show that it's okay to think in public, to let people see your reasoning unfold, even imperfectly.
And actually, in many ways, thinking out loud invites people in. It's generous. It lets the other person follow your thinking. It gives them something to respond to, even while you're still working it out.
As opposed to only speaking when you've fully formed your thought, which by the time you've done that, the conversation has often moved on.
Right? And then you're left with this fully formed thought that no longer fits the moment.
Ha! Yes, we've all been there.
So let's look at what thinking out loud actually sounds like in everyday situations. Let's just talk naturally and see what comes up. Julia, what are you having for dinner tonight?
Oh. Good question. I haven't actually decided yet. I think, I had pasta yesterday, so probably not pasta. And I was going to go to the shops, but I'm not sure I have time now. So maybe something from what's already in the kitchen? I've got some eggs, I think, and maybe some vegetables from earlier in the week. So possibly an omelet, or actually I might have some leftover soup. Let me think. Yeah, probably the soup, and then if I'm still hungry, the eggs.
Ha! Perfect. And notice what Julia just did there. She didn't just say I'm having soup. She thought through the whole decision in front of us, out loud, and it sounded completely natural. It sounded like a real person.
And the language I used was all very everyday. I think, probably, maybe, let me think, actually. None of it was planned. It just came out as I was genuinely figuring out the answer.
And those little words, I think, probably, maybe. Actually, those are the building blocks of thinking out loud in English. They signal to the listener that you're working through something, not delivering a prepared speech.
Right? And they're also really forgiving, because if you say, I think the meeting is at 3, and it turns out to be at 4, you've already hedged. You were thinking, not stating a fact.
So those words give you a kind of freedom, actually. They take some of the pressure off being precisely right.
Let's look at another everyday situation. Adam, how do you decide whether to walk or take the bus somewhere?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it depends on a few things, I suppose. The main thing is probably time. If I'm not in a hurry, I'd much rather walk. I like the headspace it gives me, but if it's raining, that changes things, because walking in the rain is fine for about 5 minutes, and then it's just miserable. So rain plus distance equals bus, I think. But actually, even on a rainy day, if it's only 10 minutes, I'd probably still walk. I like walking, it clears my head. Unless it's really heavy rain, then definitely the bus.
So you've got this whole mental calculation happening. Distance, weather, time, mood.
Right?
And I didn't know that about myself until I said it just now. That's the interesting thing about thinking out loud. Sometimes you discover what you actually think by hearing yourself say it.
That's such a true and lovely observation. And it's one of the reasons that thinking out loud is genuinely useful, not just for communication, but for your own thinking.
Like the conversation helps you think.
Exactly. The act of putting something into words clarifies it, even to yourself.
So for learners, this is actually a double benefit. You're practicing English, and you're thinking more clearly at the same time.
Okay, let's look at the language more closely, because we've been naturally using a lot of thinking out loud phrases, and I want to slow down and just point to some of them.
Sure, go ahead.
So there are phrases that signal you're starting to think, like, let me think, or okay, so, or that's a good question. Those give you a moment to begin without silence feeling awkward.
And then there are phrases that signal you're in the middle of working something out, like I suppose, I mean, kind of, sort of, I think. Probably, those tell the listener, I'm still figuring this out, stay with me.
And there are phrases that signal a change in direction, like actually wait, or actually no, hang on, maybe not. Those are the little moments of self-correction, and they are completely natural in everyday English conversation.
Right? If someone is speaking and they say, I think we should go on Saturday. Actually, wait. No, Sunday works better for me. That sounds like a real person, not a robot.
And it sounds confident, actually, strangely enough, because changing your mind mid-sentence means you're actually checking your thinking. You're not just saying anything, you're making sure you mean what you say.
I like that framing. Self-correction as a sign of care, not a sign of weakness.
Let's talk about thinking out loud in slightly more serious situations, not just dinner or bus routes. What about when you're working through an actual problem?
Yes, because that's where it can feel more stressful, when the stakes feel higher.
Right? If someone asks you a question in a meeting and you're not sure of the answer, the temptation is to either go silent or say something vague and hope it sounds better than it is.
Whereas actually, thinking out loud in that moment, genuinely working through it in front of the group, can come across as really confident if you do it well.
Exactly. There's a difference between freezing up and thinking visibly. Freezing up looks like panic. Thinking visibly looks like someone who is engaged and working.
And the language is key. If you say, that's a really interesting point. I'm just thinking through it. So if we assume that X, then, actually that would mean Y, which I hadn't considered. That sounds like someone with a sharp mind.
As opposed to just saying nothing and then eventually saying, I'm not sure, which sounds like someone who wasn't really thinking.
Even though both people might have been doing exactly the same amount of thinking, the difference is just whether you let people hear it.
Let's role play a work situation. I'll be a colleague who has just raised a concern in a meeting, and Adam, you're the one who needs to respond, but you're not totally sure what the answer is?
Okay.
So I just wanted to raise a concern about the timeline for this project. I'm not sure we've built in enough time for the testing phase.
Right? Okay. So let me just think through that for a second. So the deadline is the 14th, and we said testing would start on the 9th, which gives us 5 days. I'm just thinking about what we know from last time. Testing took about a week last time, didn't it?
Yes, I think it was close to that.
So yeah, 5 days might be tight, although this version is simpler than the last one in some ways, so it's possible it would go faster. But I take your point. I'm not sure 5 days gives us much buffer if something comes up. Can I come back to you on the exact numbers after the meeting? I want to double-check the scope before I say anything definitive.
Of course, yes. That makes sense.
Okay, so I didn't have a perfect answer, but I thought through it out loud. I used what I knew. I acknowledged the uncertainty, and I asked for a little time to confirm before committing.
And that came across as totally competent. You weren't faking confidence, but you also weren't just saying, I don't know. You were showing that you were actively engaging with the question.
And the phrase, let me just think through that for a second, is so useful in professional settings. It buys you a moment, and it signals that a thoughtful answer is coming.
Rather than silence, which can read as not knowing, or rushing to an answer, which can read as not really thinking.
Let me think through that sits right in the middle. Confident, honest, thoughtful.
Let's also talk about how you react when someone else is thinking out loud, because it's not just about your own thinking. Part of this is knowing how to be a good listener when another person is working through something in front of you.
That's a really good point, because thinking out loud is a collaborative act. You need someone who is willing to stay with you while you do it. Who doesn't jump in too quickly and close off your thinking?
Right? If someone is in the middle of working something out and you immediately offer the answer, even if the answer is correct, you've kind of short-circuited something.
So what are the things you can do to support someone who is thinking out loud?
One thing is just very simple. You stay quiet, you give them space, you don't rush to fill the silence.
Which is harder than it sounds, because silences in conversation can feel awkward, and the instinct is to fill them.
But a silence that comes while someone is thinking is not an awkward silence, it's a productive silence. And learning to tell the difference is a real conversational skill.
And then when they arrive somewhere, you can respond in a way that builds on their thinking, rather than redirecting to your own thoughts.
Things like, that's interesting. I was following your reasoning, and I was wondering the same thing about the timeline, or, I like where you're going with that. What about the cost side?
So you're showing that you were tracking their thinking, and you're inviting them to keep going.
Which is very encouraging for the person, because thinking out loud takes a little courage, and feeling like someone is genuinely following along makes you braver about doing it.
Let's talk about expressing uncertainty, because this is really central to thinking out loud, and it can feel uncomfortable for learners.
Yes, because a lot of learners feel pressured to be right, to only say things they're sure about, and uncertainty can feel like admitting weakness.
But in English conversation, expressing uncertainty naturally is not a weakness. It's actually a sign of intellectual honesty. People trust you more when you're honest about what you don't know.
And there's a whole range of ways to do it, from very soft uncertainty to stronger uncertainty, so you can calibrate based on how unsure you actually are.
So on the soft end, you might say I think or I believe, which just means you're reasonably confident, but not 100%.
Then a bit more uncertain. I'm not entirely sure, but, or I might be wrong, but those flag a higher level of uncertainty while still committing to saying something.
And then on the more uncertain end, I'm not sure about this one, or I genuinely don't know, but off the top of my head. Those tell the listener to take what you're about to say with a pinch of salt.
And they're all valid. They all have their place. The key is matching the level of uncertainty in your language to the level of uncertainty you actually feel.
Because if you always sound certain, people stop trusting you when you turn out to be wrong. But if you calibrate your certainty honestly, your words carry more weight.
Let's do a role play where uncertainty and reasoning are happening at the same time. Two friends discussing something that's in the news.
Sure, okay. So I was reading something earlier about how more and more companies are moving to a 4-day working week, and I was thinking about it, and I'm honestly not sure how I feel about it.
Really? I would have thought you'd be in favor. You always say you want more time at home.
Yeah, I know. And on the surface it sounds great, but I'm kind of wondering, if you're doing the same amount of work in fewer days, doesn't that just mean you're working more intensely? Like the number of days goes down, but the pressure goes up?
That's a fair point. I hadn't thought about it that way. Although some studies apparently show that when people have that extra day off, they actually come back more focused. So the intensity might not be as bad as you'd expect.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe the productivity actually stays the same or improves, but I'm still not sure how that works for jobs where the work is more, I don't know, unpredictable, like customer-facing roles. If a customer needs you on a Friday and you're not there.
Right. So maybe it works better for some jobs than others.
Exactly. I think that's what I was circling around. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing, which is probably why I wasn't sure how I felt about it, because it really depends.
That is such a nice example of thinking out loud. You started with, I'm not sure how I feel. Then you found a concern. Then you let me challenge it. Then you found a more nuanced position. And by the end, you'd actually figured out what you thought.
Right? And I didn't plan any of that. I genuinely didn't know what my conclusion was going to be before I started talking.
And that's the magic of thinking out loud. The conversation is the thinking, not just the reporting of thinking that already happened.
For language learners, this is so freeing, because it means you don't need to have your thought fully formed before you speak. You can speak in order to form your thought.
And that changes the whole pressure of conversation. Instead of, I need to prepare something good to say, it becomes, I can start somewhere and see where it goes.
Which is much more sustainable and much more enjoyable.
Let's talk about what happens when someone interrupts you while you're thinking out loud, because that can really throw people off.
Oh, yes. You're in the middle of working something out and someone jumps in and either completes your sentence or redirects the conversation, and suddenly you've lost the thread.
And in a second language, finding the thread again can feel especially hard because you were already managing a lot.
So what do you do?
Well, one option is just to reclaim the floor. And in English, you can do that very naturally. You can say, sorry, can I just finish my thought? Or just to come back to what I was saying, or let me just complete that idea.
Those phrases are clear, but not aggressive. You're not saying, you interrupted me and that was rude. You're just gently signaling that you weren't done yet.
And if you lost the thread entirely, you can just say, now I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying? And people will usually help you. Nobody minds.
And actually saying, "I've lost my train of thought," is a very human thing to say. It makes people like you, because they've all been there.
Ha! Absolutely. We've all lost our train of thought mid-sentence. It's one of the most universal experiences.
And sometimes saying, "Let me come back to that thought in a moment," gives you a graceful exit if you really can't retrieve it. You're not admitting defeat. You're just parking it.
And sometimes you do come back to it, and sometimes you don't. And usually that's fine either way.
Let's talk a little about the cultural side of this. Because thinking out loud is quite normal and accepted in English conversation. But that's not universal. In some cultures, it's expected that you think privately first and only speak when you're certain.
Right? And for people from those backgrounds, thinking out loud can feel almost irresponsible, like you're wasting the other person's time with unfinished thoughts.
But in most English-speaking conversational cultures, it's actually the opposite. Thinking out loud is seen as engaging, as sharing, as bringing people into your process.
And there's a kind of trust in it, too. When you think out loud with someone, you're implicitly saying, "I trust you enough to let you see my thinking before it's polished."
Which deepens the connection. It's vulnerable in a small way, and vulnerability, when it's appropriate and well-placed, builds relationships.
And in professional settings, too, the ability to think out loud, to reason visibly in a meeting or a discussion, is really valued. It shows that you're engaged, that you're working with the group, not just presenting to them.
And for learners specifically, thinking out loud in English is also incredibly useful for your language development, because you're stretching for words in real time. You're building connections between ideas and language that you wouldn't build if you only ever spoke when you were perfectly prepared.
It's like the difference between walking carefully on flat ground and occasionally walking on slightly uneven terrain. One is comfortable, but the other builds more strength.
I really like that. The uneven terrain of real-time thinking.
Let's do one more role play. This time I want something where both of us are thinking out loud together, working through something in real time. Let's say we're trying to figure out what to do for a friend's birthday.
Perfect. Okay, so Sarah's birthday is next week and we haven't sorted anything out yet. What are we thinking?
Right? Okay, so she likes being outdoors, but the weather next week is supposed to be a bit unpredictable. So maybe something that could work indoors or outdoors.
Or we just plan for outdoors, and if it's bad weather, we move to a backup. What does she like doing? I'm thinking she mentioned that cooking class a while ago. She said she'd love to do one.
Oh yes, she did say that could actually be really fun. And it works whatever the weather. But is it easy to book one of those last minute?
I'm not sure. Some places might be fine. Others might be booked up. I'd have to look into it. But it's worth checking, I think.
And what about cost? Some of those cooking classes are quite expensive.
True, although if we split it between the three of us, it might not be too bad. I'm thinking maybe 40 or 50 each. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I'd be happy with that. Okay, so the plan is look into cooking classes, see if there's something available next weekend, check the cost, and if it works, go for it.
I think so. Yes. And if nothing's available, we can fall back on that wine bar she likes. Just a dinner, something low-key.
That works. Okay, I feel like we've actually sorted something there.
We did. And look at how that happened. We didn't come in with a plan. We just started talking. And the thinking and the planning happened simultaneously.
And at no point did either of us wait to have a complete, fully formed idea before we spoke. We just shared each step as it arrived.
I'm thinking, what about, I'm not sure, but is that reasonable? Those were all thinking out loud moves, and together they built something.
which is so much more efficient than both of us going away, thinking separately, coming back with fixed ideas, and then having to negotiate.
And more fun, much more fun.
For our listeners, I want to give you just a few things to try this week. Not because we're making a list, just because I want you to leave today with something practical.
Go ahead.
So first, the next time someone asks you a question you're not entirely sure about, instead of going quiet or saying, I don't know, try starting with, let me think about that, and then think out loud. Just a little bit.
Even if what comes out is messy, even if you change direction, that's fine. That's the point.
Second, try using I think or I suppose or maybe more as thinking words, not because you're unsure about everything, but just to let people hear that you're working through an idea.
And third, notice when other people think out loud in conversations, in podcasts, on TV. Listen to what it sounds like, how natural it is, and let that be permission for you to do the same.
Because you will be surprised by how often people think out loud in English. How much of conversation is this gentle, visible, collaborative reasoning? And how warm and human it sounds.
And how welcomed it is. People don't judge you for not having the perfect answer ready. They connect with you for being present and real.
That's the core of it, really. Thinking out loud is being present. It's being genuinely here in the conversation, working with the other person.
Not performing, just being.
Just being, yes.
Okay, let's bring things home. If you've been with us for all 8 episodes so far, from the very first B1 conversations all the way here, you've come a long way, and I hope you can feel that.
At B2 level, you're not just communicating, you're engaging. You're thinking, reasoning, reacting, reflecting, all in English, and that is genuinely impressive.
Don't rush past that. Take a moment and appreciate how far you've come.
And remember, the goal was never to speak perfect English. The goal was always to connect, to share, to be understood, and to understand others.
And thinking out loud, messy and imperfect as it sometimes is one of the most authentic ways to do exactly that.
In episode 9, we're going to explore how to tell stories naturally in English, not written stories, but the kind of informal storytelling that happens every day. You won't believe what happened to me this morning, that kind of thing.
Because being able to tell a good story, even a small one, is one of the most powerful ways to connect with people in any language. And in English, there are particular rhythms and techniques that make stories land beautifully.
We can't wait to share that with you. Until then, keep thinking, keep speaking, and every now and then, let people hear your thinking as it happens.
Take care of yourselves, everyone. This is Think and Speak English. See you in episode 9.
Goodbye. See you next time.